When Alex asked if I would speak, I was thinking, okay, am I going to go up there and use this as a commercial for Matrix Food Technologies, or am I going to do something that I think is more relevant and more important to the industry? And if we're honest with ourselves, I think it's, as an industry, our abysmal record of advocacy with our government entities and agencies, not just here in the US, but in Europe and other parts of the world. We don't do a good job of motivating the government to both fund research and development that's critical for the industry, and we also don't do a good job of having the government, for instance, maybe the FDA and USDA promulgating regulations fast enough here in the US. So when I read a couple of weeks ago the publication that was in Nature, Cultured Meat Needs a Race to Mission, Not a Race to Market, by pretty much the New Harvest team, there was a lot to digest in that document. However, one part of it that I would like to focus on, and I think maybe a supermajority would agree, and that is the very last paragraph of the document. And in that last paragraph, they talk about resetting the approach of the industry to include a greater participation by government in the creation of programs that foster an entrepreneurial and mission-focused approach. And I personally think that's very, very important. I mean, if you see what's happening with electric vehicles and also the photovoltaic or solar panel industry in the U.S., that was backed by an enormous amount of money from the U.S. government, and for those of us in the room who are U.S. taxpayers, us. That is something that I think we need to get our government to focus on. Personally, I believe that our industry can make an even greater impact than electric vehicles can over the long term. And if you also just look recently, we passed the CHIPS Act to bring chip manufacturing back to the United States. I come from the state of Ohio, and in Columbus, where we live, we're fortunate enough that Intel chose a suburb of Columbus to build their first new chip plants in the United States in 40 years. So I think, quite frankly, the glacial speed at which government functions and moves forward is one of the greatest threats to our industry, because them not moving fast enough when they could be moving faster is something that makes it incredibly difficult for us from a commerce point of view and also from a creativity point of view, because our investors are not going to want to spend the money to allow our teams to be creative and develop and do R&D if they don't believe that the government is behind this and the government is not moving fast enough to be able to, to be able to help this industry grow and prosper. We all witnessed during COVID what government can do when they're properly motivated. And the fact that, we were able to develop vaccines in that time frame and then use emergency use authorizations to be able to utilize them was pretty impressive. I mean, it's something that I say to myself, well, why doesn't government operate that way all the time? Like why do we have to always wait on our government to move forward? So then the question becomes, how do we motivate the government to do these things and to operate at in a faster pace? One word: advocacy. It would be curious, I think, if we polled the members of Congress and both the Senate and the House, and we asked them what cultivated meat was, I wonder how many of them actually even know what the term is, or cultured meat. They probably don't know what that is. I actually have a personal relationship with my congressperson, and he didn't realize that his district had the largest number of alternative protein companies outside of California. And it wasn't until I told him that. I was like, your district is on the leading edge, because you have Matrix Food Technologies, you have Good Catch, and you have Morningstar, all in one congressional district, which is, you know, pretty impressive if you're not here in the Bay Area and the congressional districts that are here. So we don't, I think, like I was saying earlier, we don't as an industry do, and I think maybe it's because we don't yet have a true industry association that has a presence in Washington, D.C. I mean, the Good Food Institute, you know, they obviously do a great job. You know, I call them our de facto industry think tank. But I don't think that we as companies and whether it's, you know, New Harvest or the Good Food Institute, et cetera, do a good enough job of coordinating efforts to influence Congress. And believe it or not, it doesn't take a lot to influence Congress. And we could, you know, do those things. We don't do the level of advocacy that the Cattlemen's Association does or that the Dairy Council does. They do an enormous amount of interaction with the individuals who are serving in Congress, that serve on the various committees that cover those industries. And yet, I mean, to my knowledge, we're not doing it. As I stated, the Good Food Institute, you know, has had some successes in seeing that some of the items that we as an industry are, you know, that's important to us has made it into legislation and/or like executive order. However, to put it into perspective, if you look at the Open Secrets, which is a database, a public database where registered lobbying expenses are cataloged and what the money was spent on, you would learn that last year, in 2021, the Good Food Institute spent $400,000 on federal lobbying. Sounds like a lot of money. Tyson spent $2 million. Just one company, not an industry trade group, not the Cattlemen's Association, just one company alone spent $2 million on their lobbying efforts to Congress. And we need to get to, if we can't do it with money, then we need to do it with our voices. If you added all of our efforts as a, and I do know some of the larger companies, you know, have, you know, we witnessed it yesterday, have a government relations or public relations capability. But even if you added all of that together, we probably don't match just Tyson of what we're doing as companies. I want to put this, you know, to even further perspective. That you may have heard over the years, if you ever watch the news and you're paying attention and you're talking about Congress, Congress has this system called caucuses, where they create these caucuses around specific issues. There are 456 caucus committees in the House of Representatives. Everything from beef has a caucus in the House, chicken has a caucus in the House, dairy has a caucus in the House, bourbon, one of my favorite things, has a caucus in the House, and we don't. There is no plant-based caucus, plant-based food caucus, there is no alternative protein caucus, there is no cultured meat caucus. And that's something that I think we need to be asking our members of Congress to do, because any member of Congress can establish a congressional caucus. And if we did that, it would bring this, you know, the level and the attention to this industry. If you saw, you know, I just touched on the ones that were more relevant to us, less bourbon, but if you look at those 456 caucuses and what some of them are about, you would be like, how is this even possible? Like, how, who thought it was a good idea to set up this congressional caucus? So now you might be sitting there and saying to yourself, okay, this is all interesting, Eric, but how do we advocate? How do we influence? What do we do? Well, one of the things that we need to do in order to be able to influence Congress and advocate that the resources that this industry needs in order to solve a large, massive problem for the world is we need to follow a little roadmap that I put together. One is everybody in the room needs to identify their federal and state legislators. You need to know who actually sits in Washington and sits in your state capitol and represents you. You can go to house.gov, put in your address on the front page, and it will tell you who your member of Congress is. You go to senate.gov, does the same thing, and most state legislatures have the same thing. Then we don't really have industry talking points. That was one of the things, if you were here yesterday for the bioreactor to table talk, that that was one of the things they kind of touched on. Some people are still calling it cultured meat. Some people call it cultivated meat. We haven't even settled on what we call these products. And that, unfortunately, that indecision contributes to the inability to get a unified message out to the individuals that we need to get it out to. So we need to have industry talking points, generic industry talking points that everybody that's in the industry knows and can speak to. Once you've done that, the next thing you want to do is you want to investigate your legislators. You want to know what makes them tick. You want to read their bios. We don't know if a particular member of Congress grew up on a farm or was has a family member, a spouse, for instance, that is a researcher in biomedical sciences. All that plays into this. And you want to know those things. You want to know what their likes and dislikes are. Once you have all that done, the first thing you want to do is you want to send them a letter about this. Because one of the things that members of Congress do when an issue comes up, they literally go to their staff and say, has anybody written us a letter about this? Has anybody called this office about this? Has anybody sent us an email about this? And when the staff says, no one has ever contacted us about this, guess what that congressperson does? Forgets about it, puts it to the side. And that happens a lot more often than you would think. So that's one of the reasons why it's really important to start sending either, now the preferred method is email. Send an email to your member of Congress. Have your family and friends do the same. And then, if we did have a true industry organization or association, most industry associations have an annual lobbying day, the national level ones, in Washington, where they go and visit their members of Congress. So since we don't have that, if you ever have the occasion to be in Washington, D.C., call your member of Congress's office and ask to have a meeting with them, and they'll meet with you, believe it or not. You may not get the member of Congress, but you'll get that staff member, which is, quite frankly, the person you want to talk to anyway, because they're the ones that get the job done. And relay to them the importance of this industry and what it's doing for this country and the world. The last thing you're going to do is you're going to ask that member of Congress to consider being a founding member of the Cultured Meat Congressional Caucus. And if we get that going, it puts us on the map. Ask them also to consider sponsoring legislation for funding to advance this industry, and then ask them to write the president and fast track the development of the regulations for this industry with the FDA and USDA. I was really, really happy to see the executive order that came out in September regarding biotechnologies, et cetera, and the inclusion of our industry in that paper. But what it failed to do was to make it an actual priority of the various agencies that cover this industry. And in particular, I'd like to have, I would love to see President Biden say to the FDA and USDA, make this a priority and get it done in the next 12 months. You know, we do that kind of stuff for other, you know, for other situations, so we should be doing it for this. Because I don't think people really understand, and I alluded to it earlier, how this industry will be able to positively affect every human being on the planet. I'd like to ask you a question to illustrate another point. If you had to guess, who do you believe right now in Congress is leading the effort to have the word milk removed from soy, almond, and coconut-based drink products? Would you think it was maybe Senator Ted Cruz or Senator Tom Cotton? You'd probably be shocked to learn that it's Senator Elizabeth Warren and Senator Chris Murphy. Why? I have no idea. I didn't think that Massachusetts and Connecticut were, you know, Wisconsin from a dairy, you know, dairy perspective, but somebody got to somebody. So the point is, we should not be making assumptions about our legislators and what we think they may or may not support. Our job is to convince them that this is a necessary industry and they should be supporting it. Because this industry, you know, will contribute, and this part's really important because this is like the one thing that always is in the equation when Congress decides whether or not they're going to spend money on something. Does what they're going to be doing, does this program affect national security? The answer is, to me, this industry definitely affects national security because food security is national security. And we want to make sure that we have the ability to grow our feeding populace in the U.S. and their feeding populace in the rest of the world. You never know, again, who that member of Congress is related to, like who their spouse, their brother, their sister, their parent, you know, who they're related to and what is important in that person's life, which makes it then important in their life. And we may have allies that we don't even know we have. But they just don't know what cultured meat is yet, but that's why we're doing this. Lastly, I'd like everyone to consider using their social media don't have to be political about it, but when there's good news about our industry, repost it. And when you repost it, you tag your member of Congress, you tag your governor, you tag your state legislator, you tag all those people. You tag GFI, you tag New Harvest, you tag your Chamber of Commerce, you know, your state Chamber of Commerce, because it puts it on their radar. And if enough of us do that, it gets placed on people's radar. When we do all of this, our legislators will know who we are, and it'll make it really, really difficult for them to ignore us. And right now that's happening, and a lot of it's because they don't even know we exist. So we need to be doing that. So that's what I came to tell you today, which I thought was more important than me telling you about our scaffolds and microcarriers. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I do have a question, and if anybody else has a question, feel free to come up to the Q&A mic. But I guess my question is regarding, you know, the fact that we don't have this unified voice. Let's say we have these different groups coming together. Maybe to step back, all of the individual kind of actions that somebody can take, I think, were excellent. But if we are kind of putting together some lobbying efforts, do you think it would be bad if there were multiple kind of groups, you know, since we don't have this unified voice? Or do you think it's imperative that we do kind of come together before we go out and lobby?
I think the answer was revealed in the session yesterday, the bioreactor to table, where if somebody does something wrong, it becomes really wrong for all of us. And that's why I think it's critical to have a single unified industry voice that, I'm talking at the highest level here. You know, obviously each of the companies, depending upon their technology they're utilizing to develop their products, et cetera, are going to have different needs and wants out of Congress potentially. But the overall industry goals, you know, need to be agreed upon, and I don't know if we're doing that. And I mean, I joke, like in Ohio, we have the Ohio Christmas Tree Association, for crying out loud, you know, which is all the people who sell Christmas trees at Christmas. And yet we don't have an alternative protein, so we're working on that in Ohio right now to establish that. So at least Ohio is going to have one. But we really need to have one at the national level here in you know, so that could be, you know, somewhere in the DC area, and the folks that work there can be on the Hill regularly. I like yesterday, Eric and Andrew spent a lot of time. I have another company that's in the defense space, and I've spent a lot of time on the Hill in committee meetings and visiting members of Congress to explain to them why they need to be supporting a particular part of the defense budget. And one of the things I learned was this, that this is what they listen to. And if you're not up on the Hill, meeting with their staff, they don't know you exist.
Quick observation, Mark Johnson, Texture Technologies. There was an issue that was important to me that wasn't being picked up by lobbyists, so I actually went to Washington and made a list of all the Ways and Means members, and was able to speak to about 90% of the chiefs of staff of each of them. By just walking in the door, no appointments, asked for the chief of staff or whoever covered this issue. I had a handout, and it was unbelievable how welcoming they were. Their first reaction was, we don't get anybody who's not a lobbyist. And so the fact that you were a small businessman expressing concerns to your industry really resonated with them, and it's really welcoming. It was like 3 or 4 days that were really powerful. It told you that access was not only to the lobbyists. So I do encourage anybody who has some time to make some time. If you have a voice to say something, say it. It actually did work.
Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely contrary to what you see on TV. Many of the members of Congress of both parties happen to actually be friends, and they actually have a sincere desire to do the right things. That's one of the things that I've witnessed firsthand, because there's a lot of times where you want a co-sponsor from the other side, because that's what makes it bipartisan, right? So you want to have somebody that is going to be willing to reach out, and the supermajority of the rank and file members of both parties are there because they believe they're doing the job of the American people. So it's really, really important to do what the gentleman just said, and it's go educate them.